Coming up today on The Story.
I had come back from prep school, boarding school, to be met by my third brother, little Jimmy, who had a tear in his eye, and he said, "Dad, my cat Tigger is in trouble." I said, "Why? What's wrong?" He said, "Well, she's been having so many kittens that Dad says he's going to have to do something about it." He said, "Ed, you can't let that happen." I said, "Jimmy, don't worry." I said, "I believe I can help with this problem."
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, today we have part 2 of Eric Scatterbo's conversation with his all-time favourite storyteller, Ed Somerville, who's the author of the book When Granddaddy Was Little Eddie, Tales from an Appalachian Boyhood. As we heard last time, Ed and his brothers had many mischievous adventures, and today's stories will be no exception. Before we get started, I should tell you that Ed was inspired to write his book so that his grandchildren would know what their granddaddy got up to when he was a boy, and so they could learn that there's more to life than staring at screens all day. There's a whole world out there to explore. You just might not want to do some of the things he and his brothers did. So without any further ado, here's more of Ed Somerville sharing his stories, and once again, he's joining us from his home in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina.
Welcome back to the program, Ed Somerville.
Thank you, Eric. It's a great pleasure.
Glad to have you with us once again. And today's theme, as we're going to hear some stories about your childhood, the theme is animals. And I understand one animal has something in common with animals in Australia. Is that right?
That is right. You know, we have a lot of very different kinds of animals here in the United States, especially in our part of the country here in the mountains. And, you know, with 5 little brothers growing up out in the country, we had a lot of contact with animals.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You name it, and we tried to trap it and turn it into a pet. Just everything you can imagine. But one of the most interesting things is that there's an old mountain expression here that talks about this one marsupial. It's the only marsupial that lives in North America. And, of course, we call it a possum. Now, it's called a Virginia possum. And I'm sorry to say it's one of the most hideous-looking animals that we have in this part of the world because it resembles a large, ugly rat about the size of a large cat or a small dog.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is just really ugly. But the expression that I was going to mention is that some people live so far back out in, I guess in Australia you'd say back out in the bush. We would say back out in the boondocks, that instead of using cats for pets, they said they live so far out in the mountains, they use possums for pets. Well, my brothers and I took that as a challenge. And so we had a little kind of a trap that would catch animals alive. And so we took that trap out in the woods and set it with some peanut butter. And we went out every morning to check on it. And after 2 or 3 days, sure enough, there, caught in our trap and looking very upset, was this kind of pitiful, ugly possum that was really disturbed and upset that had walked into that trap. So what we did, we took the trap and walked back into our backyard. We carefully opened up one end so I could reach my hand in, and I grabbed that thing by its prehensile tail, and I tugged it backwards out of the trap and held it high in the air, you know, upside down, like to hang from trees. Those creatures are not the smartest creatures in the world, so when it tries to climb back up itself to bite me on the hand, I could just shake it down. But they are kind of, you need to be careful because of all the animals in this part of the world, our possums have more teeth than any other animal, so I didn't want it to get its teeth into me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I kept shaking it down, but then while it had its back to me, I took my other hand and reached out and very gingerly kind of touched it on the back, which the first time it flinched, but after I kept doing it 3 and 4 or 5 times, and then after about 15 and 20 and about 50 and 60 times, it kind of got used to me touching it. And then my little brothers began to reach over and touch it. And one by one, we got to the place where we were able to stroke it and get it, you know, tamed down enough to where it was used to us. And after 2 or 3 days working with it, we actually had that possum trained. Now, it was still hideously ugly and filthy dirty. So we looked at each other and said, boys, we need to do something to help this possum out. Let's give it a bath. So we took a bucket of water and we took some shampoo, and we dipped our possum in the bucket of water and lathered it up real good. And you know what? After it dried out, we started to say, maybe our possum isn't the ugliest creature in these woods.
Oh.
It's got kind of a cute little expression on its face, and it can't help that ugly rat-like tail that it's got. We began to get attached to our possum and pet it, and that was when we found out that our possum was a female possum. And do you know why?
Why?
Because it had a pouch in the front, just like a kangaroo would. When we saw that pouch, this idea came over us to play a joke on some of our little buddies from school. And so we got a couple of coins, and we stuck them in the possum's pouch, tucked the possum under our arm, and hiked the kilometer or two down to the little town where there was a gas station with a Coke machine, just hoping that some of our school friends would be lounging around the gas station. And sure enough, there was little Wally and Buford sitting right there, and when they saw us walk up with a possum, they could not believe their eyes. "What is that thing?" they said. And we nonchalantly just said, "Oh, yeah, we live so far out in the country, we use possums for house cats." And they said, "Well, are they any good?" And about then, I held that possum upside down by its tail, fished into its pocket with my fingers, pulled out the 2 coins and popped them into the Coke machine and got out a nice cold Coca-Cola and passed it around, a big sigh. Those boys looked at us and they said, "Dang, we got to get us one of them." I guess they thought the coins, came included with the possum, but we had a good laugh about that one.
So you call that one the possum piggy bank story, is that right?
Yeah. In the book, that was called the Possum Piggy Bank. But, we didn't have to use possums for pets. We did have cats.
Oh, okay.
And there was one in particular that I was hoping to tell you about, and that was our cat named Tigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what happened?
Well, in a strange turn of events, I was able to get a scholarship when it came time to go off to high school. And I got a scholarship to one of the most outstanding college prep schools in the whole country, and got a top-notch education there. And one of the courses that I took was a course in advanced biology, where we had to do experiments on live rats, and we would anesthetize them, and then we would dissect them.
Really?
We would give them about a month, and then after that we would go back and we would do an autopsy to see what had happened, because hormonal changes in their bodies because we dissect them. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I had come back from prep school, boarding school, back to the little house up in the hills there with my brothers to be met by my third brother, little Jimmy, who had a tear in his eye, and he said, "Ed, I've got bad news." He said, "My cat Tigger is in trouble." I said, "Why? What's wrong?" He said, "Well, she's been having so many kittens that Dad says he's going to have to do something about it. And, when you live on a farm and you have a cat that's having too many kittens, when he says he's going to have to do something about it, a lot of times that means, a gunny sack in the river."
Oh,
He said, "Ed, you can't let that happen."
Yeah.
I said, "Jimmy, don't worry." I said, "I have been away to school, and I've learned a few things." And he said, "I've gotten an education, and I'm going to put that education to use. I can help you." I said, "While I was at school, I learned to do this in operation." And now, it was on a rat, but, rat, cat, what's the difference? One letter. I said, "I believe I can help with this problem." So,
oh, my goodness.
I don't know what came over them, but we went to town, and I went into a drugstore, and the proprietor actually sold me a can of ether. A 15-year-old kid. I don't think they would do that these days. But I came home with some ether. I had the boys collect an old aquarium rack out of the refrigerator, a piece of plywood, and then we waited. That's what it was. We waited for my mom and dad to conveniently go off on an errand, and go out and do some shopping or something. Mm-hmm. I said, "Boys, it's time to deal with Tigger." Well, I had them all put on their bathrobes, and of course we put them on backwards like surgeons do, and tied them around the back there. We tied Dad's handkerchiefs over our mouths, to try to be sterile as possible.
Oh, of course.
We got cleared off the dining room table and draped it with a sheet, and then we went and got my mom's sewing basket. I said, "Boys, go get Tigger." So I poured a little ether down into the aquarium. They dropped the cat down into there. We covered it with a piece of plywood. And here's Tigger, meowing and meowing inside the tank for 2 or 3 minutes. And then after a while, she starts to look sleepy. And then she falls over on her side, and she's unconscious. I said, boys, it's time to operate.
Oh, wow.
So we pulled Tigger out of there and stretched her out on the dining room table. And I looked at Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, there's an important job here, and that is anesthesia. Now, I'd made a little cone out of cardboard, and I put a cotton ball in the bottom of it with a splash of ether in there. And I said, you're to hold this cone over Tigger's face. If she starts breathing quickly, you push it up tighter so she gets more ether. If she starts breathing slowly, you pull it back so she gets more oxygen. He said, got it, Ed, I'm on it. Then I grabbed the hair clippers and I buzzed her down one side and got a razor blade and began to open her up.
Oh,
and
my
we began
goodness.
to probe and dig around inside the old Tigger. She was unconscious, didn't feel a thing. And after a while, I found the fallopian tubes, and just like we had done at school, I took a piece of thread and tied off that artery.
Unbelievable.
I took a scissor and clipped that ovary off of there.
Unbelievable.
And then we stitched that side back up and flipped her the other side. So far, so good. Well, we buzzed that side, opened her up again, and started probing around. And Eric, I hate to say it, but that's when I found out that a cat and a rat might be a little different because we could not locate the second ovary.
I can't believe you
And
found the
half
first
an
one.
hour turned into 45 minutes, and then that ether started getting to all of us, and after an hour, we looked at each other and said, we're going to have to close her back up, ovary or not. We just can't handle any more of this.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is once again chatting with his favourite storyteller, Ed Somerville, who grew up in the Appalachian Mountains in the eastern part of the United States. As we're hearing, Ed and his brothers decided to give their family cat, Tigger, a hysterectomy. We'll find out how it all turns out when we return.
The Story.